If our eyes are the window to our souls, you wouldn't want to gaze at these women. A jealous ex eliminates her competition.
She was killed because she fell in love. That was it.
A trivial neighborhood dispute ends in violence.
She was looking for someone to vent her rage. She found it.
And an unlucky businesswoman blames her fortune teller.
It's not a bad novel. It happened in
If you want to live a long and healthy life, don't date a man with a jealous ex.
Hello, homewrecker.
There are a lot of headstones throughout the countryside that say, I thought I'd be okay.
Salt Lake City, Utah, 2015. Motherhood is a blessing. 29-year-old high school teacher Chelsea Cook is about to be doubly blessed with twins.
For Chelsea, it was a dream come true. She loved children. She went into the field of education because she loved children. And she wanted to be a mother so badly.
Oh my God, these are so tiny. Look at these.
Husband Travis, her college sweetheart, is equally excited.
Can't believe I'm finally gonna be a mom.
You're born to be a mom.
Chelsea and Travis were so anxious to get married, they didn't even wait until graduation. They married before.
From an early age, Chelsea's believed marriage and being a mom will be the key to her happiness.
Into her adulthood.
Go watch TV, come on. Just a minute, go watch TV, okay?
Someone with anorexia frequently feels the world is out of their reach. Chaos, anxiety, and the only thing they can control in their life is what goes in their mouth.
Have you eaten today?
So they stop eating.
I don't have time.
I'll make you a sandwich.
No, I don't want one.
You gotta eat.
Travis has always tried to help his wife, but Chelsea's behavior becomes more erratic.
What? What now?
I can't do this anymore.
Troubles were festering. And Chelsea and Travis grew further and further apart.
I can't do it.
When the kids were only 2 years old, Travis filed for divorce. And it really threw Chelsea for a loop.
Chelsea fears a divorce will cost her more than her husband.
She became increasingly worried that the kids would be taken from her.
I want to see my kids.
She was anxious, depressed.
Wake them up!
She just wasn't the same person.
I want to see my kids.
Chelsea isn't coping with co-parenting. She seeks professional help.
Chelsea was seeing a psychiatrist who prescribed medication for anxiety and depression. And Chelsea was doing pretty good when she'd take her medications, but she stopped taking them.
Instead, she self-medicates on stimulants.
They were making her crazed and more paranoid than she was by nature.
It'd been on.
Chelsea is desperate to be reunited with her family.
You need more fire in that dragon.
But 9 months after their separation, Travis has met a new woman.
That looks so good. Yeah. Oh, well done.
26-year-old bank teller, Lisa Williams.
And that one?
She loved being a part of her community and helping out where she could.
Anyone want some cookies?
Yeah!
Oh, yeah, me too. Yeah.
She too was very passionate about children and was looking forward to having her own family someday. So when she met Travis Cook, who already had 2 young children of his own, she fell in love.
Is it good?
Yeah. I cannot hold one.
Oh.
They were cute, they were lovable, she adored them.
When Chelsea finds out Travis is dating, she starts stalking Lisa.
Chelsea couldn't abide by the fact that Lisa was filling a role in Travis's life and in the children's life.
Chelsea saw Lisa as the obstacle, the only obstacle to getting back with Travis and being a full-time mother to their kids.
In 2018, driven by jealousy and paranoia, Chelsea Cook is on a mission
Hello, homewrecker.
to scare off her ex's new girlfriend, Lisa Williams.
Stop. Stay away from my kids.
I love your kids.
Stay away.
Are you okay?
She wrote a nasty letter to Lisa.
Chelsea's stalking behavior was escalating. It's a face-to-face confrontation.
Her disturbing behavior frightens Lisa, but she doesn't report it to police.
Had a good day? Yeah, no?
She isn't Chelsea's only target.
My babies.
One second, please.
Her need to punish Travis was escalating.
What are you doing here?
Why is that tart here?
Chelsea starts throwing out nasty insults about Lisa.
Look, don't do this in front of the kids, okay? You can't be here. You gotta go.
Travis told her to just cut it out. You know, he wasn't having any more of it. Chelsea grabbed Travis, and in the altercation, he ended up falling down a flight of stairs.
It's a new low. The assault takes place in full view of their children.
Chelsea had no concern for their mental health when she attacked their father in front of them.
Chelsea was charged with domestic violence in the presence of a child.
When Chelsea became physical and violent, at that moment, there was no way she was going to get custody of her children.
On November 25th, 2018, just weeks before Chelsea is to appear in court, Travis and Lisa are getting ready for the holiday season.
Is that good? That looks great. Like that?
Travis and Lisa had the kids at their house, and they were making Christmas decorations for the tree. Handmade decorations. It doesn't get much more wholesome.
The family fun is interrupted when Travis receives a text message from Chelsea.
She said she needed to come by and bring some cold medicine for one of the kids.
When Chelsea arrived, she texted Travis to let him know that she was waiting in the parking lot to drop it off.
I'll be back in a minute, okay?
Okay.
Travis leaves the apartment. He doesn't lock the door behind him because he's going to be right back.
When he was gone, Lisa was in there with the kids. Chelsea went in.
Hey, kids. Mommy's home. Come here. Come to mommy.
What are you doing here? You can't be here. You gotta go.
He sees Chelsea there and tells her to leave.
Chelsea, now.
She gets up from where she's sitting by the kids. And goes into the bathroom and locks the door.
Yeah, no, I need the police here now.
Desperate,
Yes.
Travis calls the police. It seems to work.
She's still here, yeah.
Chelsea comes out of the bathroom. She heads straight for her coat. Travis goes, "Phew, this is good." She's gonna grab her coat and leave.
Chelsea grabs a gun from her coat. And fires 3 shots. All 3 shots strike Lisa.
Give me the gun!
The first bullet went into her chest cavity and her heart. Very rarely can anyone survive such a wound. But that wasn't enough. Chelsea shot her 2 more times.
It's horrible to think that children that age had to witness such violence.
Yeah, I need an ambulance here now. No, my girlfriend, she's been shot. She's been shot 3 times.
Travis goes over to tend to Lisa.
Yeah, no, and now. I need her now. She's dying.
But then he sees Chelsea going for her coat again.
It's okay.
And he goes, "Oh my God, what if she's got another gun in that coat?" So he grabs her and pins her up against the wall to wait for the arrival of the police.
Kids, go to the bathroom now. Lock the door.
When the police arrive, Lisa is clinging to life, but she can't be saved. She dies on the way to the hospital.
There were 4 victims that night, but Lisa was the only one that died.
Lisa was killed because she fell in love. That was it.
In 2020, Chelsea Cook pleads guilty to 7 charges, including aggravated murder, but never shows remorse.
She said, "I shot the gun in her direction." Unwillingness to take responsibility completely.
She is sentenced to 34 years to life. The judge also hands out a special punishment for the jealous mother. Chelsea cannot have any contact with her children.
The only way you can punish a mother like Chelsea is by keeping her from her children.
Chelsea took the life of a loving, caring woman because she couldn't take responsibility for her own failings.
Chelsea chose to feed her jealous self and not her mental health. And that made her a deadly woman. When an irresistible force meets an immovable object,
How dare you!
something's got to give, or someone's going to die.
In Hertfordshire, England, 2012, the future looks bright for 32-year-old Debbie Palmer and 29-year-old Paul Foxwell.
Debbie and Paul bought a house together in Welwyn Garden City, and they were hopefully going to spend many years there together.
Don't even think about it.
I'm just unpacking.
Really?
They make a good team. They've set up their own business support company and have big plans.
Debbie was the company director, and Paul was the company secretary.
They were very happy together.
I bet that's our friendly neighbour again.
And everything looked rosy.
Love for a neighbour, Jen.
Even their next-door neighbor, 60-year-old Louise Lotz,
I thought you might like some morning tea.
offers a warm welcome to the neighborhood.
Louise came from South Africa. She was very academic, went to university and got a first in English literature.
Neighborly relations are put to the test early.
Is that birch tree in your backyard? Well, I'm rather worried it's going to fall in our house.
A tree that was on Louise's property but threatening Debbie's property.
I was wondering, would you mind if we got it removed?
Sure. Then we both can have more light.
Louise is only too happy to help.
Louise even supported that application and sent a letter to the council to say she was very happy to have that tree removed.
Lovely tea, thank you.
They resolved it very well, together.
For more than a year, harmony reigns in the neighborhood until Louise has a new fence built.
I knew it. This fence is on our land.
Are you sure?
Debbie became aware the new fence was 2 inches on her property, and she made a big deal about it.
Deb, what are you doing?
Debbie became obsessed by the fence and started to attack it with the intention of destroying it.
What's going on? This fence is on my land.
Nonsense.
It is. And it's coming down.
Louise dug her heels in. She wasn't going to let Debbie push her around and tell her what to do.
How dare you? I'm calling the police.
Off you go, then.
Stop.
Are you kidding? Get out of my way.
That should have been the end of it, but it was only the beginning.
The perfect neighborhood storm began to brew.
Their altercation escalates into a bitter, ongoing feud.
What are you doing? What does it look like?
So things were obviously getting quite heated, and the tension was rising in the neighborhood.
What are you doing?
Neighbors said that it was like living next to 2 dogs barking at each other the whole time.
Confrontations, verbal abuse, fighting outdoors became the norm for Debbie and Louise. It became a battleground.
Help, I need the police.
Local police become regular visitors to the neighborhood.
They were clearly quite well aware as to what sort of things were going on.
She's a lunatic. I want her arrested.
I'm sorry, but until there's any violence, we can't help you with that, ma'am.
You'll often find in the police service that these sort of cases are sometimes one word against another.
Is it Miss Foxwell? Officer, I would like her arrested.
Oh, well, this is ridiculous.
It surely is.
What's the point of calling you then?
It's difficult for the police to establish who may or may not be to blame.
The police issue both Debbie and Louise community protection warnings. The order prohibits any further harassment, trespass, or photography across the fence.
The police thought this would solve the problem. It didn't. And neither one of those women was going to walk away.
Louise!
Someone's going to die.
In 2016, the neighborhood war is put on hold when Debbie Foxwell loses her greatest ally and the lone voice of reason in the ongoing fence line feud. Her partner, Paul, succumbs to a brief battle with cancer.
Paul died just 3 weeks after the original diagnosis.
Loss of a spouse or romantic partner is one of the most devastating things that can happen to someone. The loss is indescribable.
Debbie really did struggle. She became quite angry with the world.
It doesn't take long for Debbie to channel her pain across the back fence.
The angry, foul, vile interactions, and sometimes physical, with Debbie took on a life of its own.
Finally, in 2017, comes hope of an end to the hostilities. The man with the solution is Anthony Vroon.
Debbie met a young man, and they fell in love.
You know, I never thought I'd be this happy again.
You deserve to be happy.
Anthony actually moved into the house with Debbie Foxwell.
It's my messy neighbour. I can't sell because of that pigsty next door.
Louise was afraid to go out and work in her garden.
Oh, it's disgusting. Just look at it.
Her garden was overgrown and unkempt.
Calm down.
No, it's that cow's fault. I won't calm down. This is costing us thousands.
Whether that was true or not, no one knows, but things were about to get a lot worse.
On August 24th, 2019, the years of simmering animosity boil over in a final showdown at the fence.
Camera, every single thing you're doing. It's on camera. It's going.
Debbie began filming Louise on her mobile phone.
Away from me.
Louise was not happy. She saw this as a violation.
Get away from me. You film me. Give it back. I film you.
And Louise did something that might have sealed her fate.
How about I film you? I need to film you.
She grabbed Debbie's phone
Give it back. I need to film you.
and ran with it.
And that's when all hell broke loose.
This time, there's no stopping Debbie's rage. She confronts Liam, a tenant on Louise's property.
There is a term animal trainers use. It's called the red zone. When the animal is in fight, they will not stop. Nothing can happen until it's over. I think this is what happened to Debbie.
Terrified, Louise makes a desperate bid to escape.
Stop. Back off. Stay out of it.
Debbie sees her and chases her.
Louise ran away and she approached another neighbor's house.
Help me!
She was banging on the door, desperately asking for help.
Debbie turned the spade on its side to use it like a machete.
Debbie went nuts.
She hit Louise Lotz on the head with the spade, probably about 7 times, causing catastrophic injuries.
She fractured her eye socket, her face, and her skull during this attack.
Louise Lotz is guilty of nothing more than annoying her neighbor. She dies a savage death because the wrong person moved in next door.
After this relentless and brutal assault, Debbie simply turned round, walked away, and went back into her house.
It's over. I've done it.
And then she says to Anthony when it's over, well, it's done now. That tells me that's what she wanted all along. She found it. The vast majority of people serving time for murder in prison are not natural-born killers. She was a deceitful person who had no problem doing things that were wrong.
Late 2000, Orange County, California. It's the dawn of a new millennium, but in the Little Saigon district of Westminster, the old ways prevail.
It is not unusual in the Vietnamese community for business owners to go to a fortune teller, and people often rely on every word they say.
36-year-old Tanya Nelson needs a financial miracle.
Tanya had a lingerie shop in Little Saigon, but it wasn't doing well. She and her husband had acquired over $200,000 in debt.
I see better times ahead.
Really? A good fortune teller. They were extremely respected and looked up to, and they were a bit like a celebrity.
None is more successful or revered than Jade Smith.
Your bad luck will change.
Really?
Tanya hung on every piece of advice Jade gave her.
If you move.
Move? To where?
She thought that she needed to move the location of the business in order for the business to do better.
North Carolina. You'll find success in North Carolina. That's where your future is.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's good news.
Very good news. I think we should celebrate.
Jade told her that the solution to her financial problems was to leave California and go to North Carolina.
To new beginnings.
To new beginnings.
That's exactly what Tanya did.
Great.
A new town, a new clientele, but the change brings no solution to Tanya's money troubles.
And that also starts to spiral, and she starts to have financial problems.
Would you like to make another appointment?
No, not at the moment.
Jade told her to go to North Carolina and start a new business there and everything will be fine. It wasn't.
Tanya doesn't give up.
Hello, Tanya Salon.
She simply diversifies the business.
Cindy's available. At what time?
She cooked up a new way to make money. She turned it into an illegal escort service.
Okay, cash up front.
Always.
She had to supplement her income, and this seemed to be the easiest course of action for her by starting this escort service.
Sex sells, but not so well in North Carolina.
Tanya opened a store in a very conservative area of North Carolina next to a church. So it wasn't exactly the type of establishment that would be frequented by that community.
Tanya learned early on that this business wasn't going to do well.
Tanya can't win, and all her woes can be traced back to just one person.
You told me that everything would be all right.
Tanya, you just have to be patient.
All your hard work will pay off. I should never have moved here.
She's about to hit complete rock bottom. She has a business that is a failure. She has lost her home. It's been foreclosed. And so her world as she knows it is about to collapse.
Everything will be fine. You just have to have faith.
Jade got her into this mess, and Tanya decides it will be Jade who gets her out.
I need your help. I need you to come with me to Lady Howe's place.
Her daughter had the best of everything.
It's really nice to have you home.
More importantly, everybody knew about Jade's money.
Especially Tanya.
Can I see you?
Of course, of course. Anytime.
Tanya set up an appointment to meet with Jade.
I'll see you soon, okay?
Okay, great. Thanks.
All right.
She wanted a special reading so that she could help her with all of the things that she was struggling with.
Following Jade's advice has brought Tanya to the brink of bankruptcy.
North Carolina. You'll find success there. I think that's where your future is.
She wants a refund with interest.
She decides to fly to California and rob Jade of her money and her jewelry. But she needed some help.
Tanya turns to the one person she can totally control, Philippe Zamora.
No, I can't.
You will. Otherwise, I'll talk to your wife.
Okay. Just don't tell my wife, okay?
Tanya knew Felipe's secret because she was arranging gay hookup partners for him. And he was closeted, so he would do what Tanya wanted.
Tanya and Philippe head to California, and on April 21st, 2005, they arrive at Jade's for their scheduled reading.
They're beautiful. Thank you.
Tanya isn't aware that Anita is in her bedroom studying.
But I thought you were in Korea.
I want to apologize.
Jade believed this was just another consult from her good client.
She turned her back. Big mistake.
Tanya picked up a kitchen knife.
What are you doing?
And just went wild. She started stabbing Jade in the neck, face, and head.
Jade's daughter, Anita, heard the commotion.
Mom! Stop! What are you doing?
When Anita started screaming, Tanya told Philippe to shut her up.
Tanya grabs another knife from the butcher block.
Stop her screaming!
Anita had nothing to do with this. She was in the wrong place at the wrong time.
Philippe was robotically doing what Tanya was ordering him to do. Tanya called all the shots.
Mother and daughter bleed out on the kitchen floor.
The last thing that Jade hears is the whimpering of her daughter as she's being stabbed to death. The cruelty of that is just mind-boggling.
Tanya and Philippe search the house for cash and jewelry.
They knew that Jade had a lot of flashy jewelry, handbags, designer clothing, things of that nature.
They find credit cards and designer goods, but miss the pot of gold.
What they failed to find was the $68,000 that was in the vacuum cleaner bag and the $500,000 in jewelry that was in the coffee grounds.
They also make another fundamental error.
We believe in their haste and, again, poor planning, that they meant to take the knives with them and forgot them at the crime scene.
Well, you know, we're not talking about experienced hitmen here.
Tanya then adds a final coat of crazy to her shocking crime.
They leave the scene and they go to a local store and get a gallon of white paint. They go back to the murder scene and pour the white paint over the victims' faces and hands.
Witchcraft, voodoo, we had every opinion coming in at us from all these outside sources on what this could have meant.
The most obvious to us as investigators is that it would have destroyed any DNA evidence at that time.
They go back to North Carolina and try to assume a normal life.
And for a few weeks, they do just that.
We were dealing with two people that didn't have criminal history. They weren't in any kind of DNA databases.
That makes them harder to find. They become more of a ghost, if you will.
After 6 weeks, the police are no closer to finding the killers. But Tanya simply can't control her overwhelming lust for money.
Tanya was so greedy for Jade's money, she took her credit cards. She started using them.
At Versace and Armani and some of the other stores.
Then Tanya makes a purchase that puts a bullseye on her back.
She purchased the airline tickets under Jade Smith's name.
So who was calling themselves by the name of a dead woman and using her credit cards? They were about to find out.
The police are waiting when Tanya's flight lands in Orange County. She's arrested for credit card fraud. But when it comes to the murders,
You make it easier for yourself if you talk.
Tanya doesn't say a word. Ever.
She's never spoken about the murders at all.
She was going to make us figure this out ourselves and not give any explanation.
Tanya is very cool, calm, and collected at all times. Basically feels no guilt.
Philippe can't stop talking.
How do you know Tanya Nelson?
I wish I didn't.
What did she make you do?
She made me go to chains.
He just talked and talked and talked. Ultimately, that initial interrogation was almost up to 6 hours of him describing everything that happened.
She threatened me. She screamed at me, "Kill her! Kill her! Stab her!"
In 2009, Philippe Zamora pleads guilty to 2 counts of first-degree murder and is sentenced to 27 years to life in prison.
Philippe Zamora was played by a master manipulator and got nothing for it but life in prison.
Tanya Nelson is convicted of 2 counts of first-degree murder. Due to the special circumstances, the number of victims, the motive of money, and the manner of attack, she's sentenced to death and is awaiting execution on California's death row.
I don't think there's any better place for a person like Tanya to be sitting.
Tanya believed Jade owed her compensation for bad advice. The price she set was 2 innocent lives.
The motive for this crime, it is preposterous. It's hard to believe that someone could be that obsessed and to go to such great lengths. It's not a bad novel. It happened in real life, and 2 beautiful people paid for it.
Tanya, to this day, is the queen of greed and evil. She is a woman that you do not want to cross.
I think it was the perfect storm that may never have happened again in her life. But nevertheless, Tanya chose to solve her problems through murder.
These deadly
At 5:17 a.m., the phone rang in a quiet apartment block in eastern Berlin, a sound sharp enough to cut through sleep, a sound that would echo for decades in a city still learning how to breathe again after the wall fell. And on the other end of the line was a voice that didn't raise itself, didn't tremble, just stated a fact so calmly it felt unreal. A body had been found near the spree, no identification, no witnesses, and something about the scene felt wrong. Berlin in 1992 was a city stitched together with fresh scars, cranes on every horizon, streets renamed, borders erased, but memories still fenced in, and in that in-between moment, when the future felt open and dangerous, a single death slipped into the cracks and refused to leave. The location was unremarkable, a narrow strip of grass between a service road and the river, a place commuters passed every day without seeing it, and that was the first shock, that something so quiet could hide something so loud, because the victim hadn't been robbed, hadn't been left in haste, hadn't been hidden with care, just placed there as if the city itself was expected to deal with it. The police sealed off the area as the morning light crept in, weak and gray, illuminating details no one wanted to look at too closely. A coat button torn loose, footprints that didn't match, a watch stopped at a time no one could explain. Reporters arrived before the forensics vans were gone, cameras hungry, microphones eager, headlines already forming before facts had names. They would later identify the victim as Anna Keller, 26 years old, recently moved to Berlin from the South, a graphic design student chasing opportunity in a city reinventing itself, someone who had called her mother every Sunday. Someone who never missed a class without explaining why. Someone who, according to friends, hated walking alone at night yet did so that evening because she believed the city was finally safe. Her last confirmed sighting came from a late tram, a conductor who remembered her because she'd asked, twice, if the next stop was Alexanderplatz, and when she stepped off, she vanished into a city that promised anonymity and delivered it too well. The initial investigation moved fast, then slowed, then stalled, a familiar rhythm in cases that would later be labeled cold, but at the time no one used that phrase yet, because everyone still believed answers were just one interview away. Detectives knocked on doors, questioned neighbors, traced her final movements through receipts and ticket stubs, reconstructed her last hours minute by minute, yet every lead dissolved under scrutiny. No signs of forced struggle, no clear motive, no obvious suspect. The autopsy raised more questions than it answered, confirming death but refusing to explain intent, leaving behind a margin of uncertainty wide enough for theories to grow wild. Berlin watched closely, because this wasn't just a crime, it was a symbol, a reminder that beneath the optimism of reunification lay shadows that didn't disappear with concrete and barbed wire. Newspapers ran stark headlines, television anchors spoke in hushed tones, and suddenly everyone had an opinion, a fear, a story of a near miss. Women changed their routes home, parents called their children more often, and the city, for all its size, felt briefly claustrophobic. Police spokespeople assured the public that resources were being deployed, that progress was being made, that there was no reason for panic, even as the case file thickened without getting any clearer. Witnesses came forward, or thought they did, fragments of memory sharpened by attention, a man in a dark jacket, a car idling too long, footsteps heard and ignored, but nothing held. Surveillance cameras were rare, footage grainy, and what little existed offered only silhouettes and speculation. The river yielded nothing, the surrounding neighborhoods yielded rumors, and every promising angle collapsed under the weight of contradiction. Within months, the investigation slipped from the front pages to the inside columns, then to brief mentions, then to silence, except for one word that began to circulate quietly among detectives and journalists alike: cold. Years passed, files were boxed, offices moved, officers retired, and Anna Keller became a name spoken mostly by her family and a small circle of investigators who refused to forget. Berlin changed around the case, glass towers replacing empty lots, tourists filling streets once deserted, and yet the unanswered questions remained, stubborn, unmoved by time or progress. Occasionally, a tip would surface, a letter sent anonymously, a call made late at night, each one examined, logged, and ultimately dismissed, each one reopening wounds without offering relief. What made this case different, what kept it alive in whispers and late-night conversations, were the details that never quite fit. The watch stopped at an impossible hour, the fibers on her coat that matched nothing in any database, the absence of fear suggested by her posture at the scene, as if she knew the person she was with, trusted them enough not to run. Detectives argued quietly about it for years, about whether it was a crime of opportunity or something planned, whether the city's chaos had hidden a predator or protected someone familiar. By the early 2000s, the case was officially unsolved, archived, assigned a number that meant little to anyone outside the department, but cold cases have a way of staying warm beneath the surface, waiting for the smallest spark. That spark came from technology no one in 1992 could have imagined would matter. A routine review of evidence prompted by a nationwide initiative to re-examine unsolved crimes, a young analyst tasked with digitizing old files, someone who noticed a discrepancy no one had flagged before, a lab note scribbled in the margin, fibers logged but never fully compared because the database didn't exist yet. The reanalysis didn't make headlines at first, didn't even register outside a small room filled with humming computers and fluorescent light, but it shifted something, nudged the case out of dormancy. A match appeared, partial but compelling, linking those fibers to a manufacturing run traced back to a facility outside Berlin, a place with a short list of employees in 1992, a place that suddenly mattered. Investigators tread carefully, aware of the weight of time, aware that reopening a cold case meant reopening lives, but also aware that this might be the only chance they had. As inquiries resumed, quietly at first, patterns emerged that had been invisible before, connections obscured by the noise of a city in transition. One name surfaced repeatedly, not as a suspect, not yet, but as a presence, someone who crossed paths with Anna more than once in her final weeks, someone who had been interviewed briefly and dismissed when the case was young and impatient. Records were pulled, statements reread with fresh eyes, and inconsistencies that once seemed minor now felt heavy, deliberate. The community, unaware at first, sensed something when unmarked cars returned to familiar streets, when old neighbors were contacted, when journalists began asking questions that sounded too specific to be speculative. Whispers turned into murmurs, murmurs into headlines, and suddenly the phrase "Berlin 1992 cold case" was everywhere again, paired with words like breakthrough and new evidence, words that promised closure but delivered tension instead. Families who thought they'd made peace felt the ground shift beneath them, and a city that believed it had moved on found itself looking back. As the investigation gathered momentum, pressure mounted on authorities to explain why it had taken so long, why certain paths hadn't been followed, why a life could fade into paperwork for decades before being remembered by a machine. Officials spoke of limitations, of context, of lessons learned, but the public wanted accountability, wanted to believe that time hadn't erased justice, only delayed it. And somewhere at the center of it all, the truth waited, unchanged by technology or attention, ready to shock a nation that thought it knew this story already. The evidence now being reviewed doesn't scream, it whispers, but in those whispers lies the potential to rewrite everything, to turn an unsolved death into a solved case, or to reveal how close certainty can come without ever quite arriving. Berlin listens again, holding its breath, because this isn't just about what happened in 1992, it's about whether the past can still speak, whether a cold case can truly be solved, and what it means when new evidence forces a country to confront an answer it may not be ready to hear. The renewed investigation didn't begin with sirens or press conferences, it began with silence, with doors closing softly behind detectives who understood that noise was the enemy now, that after all these years the truth would not be chased. It would have to be cornered gently, patiently, because the smallest misstep could send it retreating back into the dark. Boxes that smelled of dust and old paper were opened again, their contents spread across tables like pieces of a puzzle that had never quite been finished, photographs fading at the edges, transcripts typed on machines that no longer existed, names underlined by hands long retired from the force. Each detail was revisited not as it had been understood in 1992, but as it could be understood now, through the lens of everything that had changed. The name that kept resurfacing belonged to Marcus Weber, a maintenance supervisor at the textile facility linked to the fibers, a man who had lived less than 2 kilometers from where Anna Keller's body was found, a man who, according to old notes, had met her during a freelance project she'd taken on shortly after arriving in Berlin. At the time, that connection had seemed mundane, professional, unremarkable in a city full of brief encounters and loose ties. But time has a way of sharpening relevance, and what once looked like coincidence now looked like proximity. Weber had been interviewed once, for less than an hour, his answers polite, his alibi thin but accepted, his file stamped and shelved while attention shifted elsewhere. Detectives now read that interview with a different ear, noticing pauses that had been transcribed as ellipses, answers that circled questions instead of meeting them head-on, a casual dismissal of the last time he'd seen Anna that didn't match her phone records. Back then, those discrepancies were drowned out by louder theories, by the assumption that danger came from strangers, from the chaos of reunification, not from someone whose name could be written down and spelled correctly. Now, those same discrepancies glowed on the page, small but persistent, refusing to be ignored. Re-interviewing Weber required care. 30 years had passed, and the law treated memory like a fragile artifact, easily contaminated, easily broken. When detectives finally sat across from him again, he was older, heavier, his hair gray, his manner calm in a way that felt rehearsed. He spoke of Berlin in the 90s as if it belonged to another life, another man, and insisted he remembered little of Anna beyond her work, her punctuality, her smile. When asked about the fibers, he shrugged, said he handled materials every day, said half the city probably carried the same traces without knowing it. But the investigation no longer relied on what people said alone. Financial records were cross-checked, revealing small transactions that placed Weber near the river on the night in question, purchases made at a kiosk that had since closed, receipts recovered through banking archives that hadn't existed when the case first went cold. Phone data, once impossible to retrieve, was reconstructed through call logs and network maps, suggesting contact that Weber had never mentioned. None of it was definitive, each piece plausible on its own, but together they formed a pattern that demanded explanation. As word of these developments leaked, the media returned with a vengeance, framing the story as a reckoning, a chance to right an old wrong, headlines asking how a killer could live unnoticed for decades, how a city could forget a young woman whose death had once terrified it. Talk shows debated responsibility, pundits argued over hindsight, and social media, newly hungry for narratives of justice delayed, amplified every rumor, every half-confirmed detail. Anna Keller's name trended again, stripped of privacy, transformed into a symbol. Her family watched from a distance, torn between hope and dread, because reopening the case meant reopening grief, reliving moments they'd spent years trying to seal away. They were cautious in their statements, asking for patience, for respect, reminding the public that behind the headlines was a person who had loved and been loved, a life measured in more than evidence tags and file numbers. Investigators, aware of this, moved slowly, resisting the pressure to deliver answers before they were ready. The fibers, once an overlooked detail, became the centerpiece of the case. Advanced analysis linked them not only to the facility, but to a specific batch produced in early 1992, a batch assigned to a limited team, narrowing the field further. Combined with soil samples taken from Anna's shoes, samples that matched a service road near Weber's residence more closely than the official crime scene, the narrative shifted subtly but unmistakably. This was no longer a crime that could be attributed to chance or anonymity. It began to look intimate, familiar, unsettlingly close. Still, the question of motive hung heavy. There was no history of conflict, no record of threats or disputes, no clear reason why Anna would have been targeted. Friends described her as cautious, independent, not prone to risky encounters. Investigators speculated quietly about misunderstandings, about rejected advances, about moments that escalated without warning, but speculation remained just that, a dangerous thing in a case built on evidence long past its prime. As surveillance teams discreetly observed Weber's routines, nothing dramatic emerged. He lived quietly, kept to himself, volunteered occasionally, maintained a life that seemed almost deliberately unremarkable. Those who knew him described him as reserved, reliable, the last person they'd expect to see associated with a crime that had haunted the city. This contrast between public perception and investigative suspicion only deepened the tension, reminding everyone how easily normalcy can mask something darker. Then came the break that no one had anticipated. During a routine search of archive storage belonging to the textile facility, investigators uncovered a mislabeled box containing personal items left behind by employees during renovations in the late 90s. Inside were notebooks, tools, scraps of material, and among them, a small sketchbook bearing Anna Keller's initials, a book her family had reported missing after her death. How it ended up there was a question that demanded an answer, and one that shifted the case from circumstantial to personal in a single, quiet moment. The discovery reignited everything. Weber was brought in again, this time under a different tone, the question sharper, the atmosphere heavier. Presented with the sketchbook, he hesitated, just long enough to be noticed, then claimed ignorance, suggesting it might have been misplaced during a project, suggesting coincidence. But coincidences, like time, had run out. For the first time, the possibility of charges was discussed openly, prosecutors consulted, legal strategies debated. Yet even now, certainty remained elusive. No eyewitness had come forward, no confession had been offered, and the physical evidence, though compelling, was still subject to interpretation. Defense attorneys prepared to challenge every inference, every technological leap applied to decades-old material. The case hovered in a liminal space, suspended between solved and unsolved, between closure and doubt, and the nation watched, aware that whatever came next would ripple far beyond a single verdict. As night fell over Berlin, the city that had changed so much since 1992 seemed to hold onto its breath, its streets buzzing with life even as an old story resurfaced beneath the lights. The cold case was no longer cold, but it wasn't resolved either, and in that narrow gap between revelation and proof lay the most dangerous territory of all, where truth and belief collided, and where the past, once awakened, refused to go back to sleep. The pressure intensified not with a single announcement, but with accumulation, with the slow realization that this story was no longer contained by case files and conference rooms, that it had escaped into the public imagination where restraint dissolves and certainty is demanded on schedule. Every movement by investigators was watched, every delay interpreted, and in that glare the smallest detail took on outsized meaning. The sketchbook became an icon overnight, reproduced in newspapers, dissected by commentators, its blank pages treated as if they might speak if stared at long enough. How could something so personal vanish for decades and reappear now, and what did that say about everything else that had been missed? Forensic teams returned to the riverbank, not because they expected to find something new, but because revisiting old ground had become symbolic, a way of showing that no assumption was sacred anymore. The landscape had changed, reinforced and landscaped, but beneath the surface the soil told an older story. Samples were taken, compared, mapped against archived data, revealing subtle consistencies that aligned with the theory forming quietly at the center of the case. It wasn't proof, not yet, but it was coherence, the kind that investigators crave after years of fragmentation. Meanwhile, Weber's past was peeled back layer by layer. Former coworkers were contacted, some reluctantly, others with a sense of unease they couldn't quite articulate. Stories emerged that had never reached police before, not because they were explosive, but because they'd seemed insignificant at the time. His tendency to linger after hours, his fixation on routine, his discomfort when plans changed. One former colleague recalled seeing Anna at the facility more often than her contract required. Another remembered Weber offering to walk her to the tram, a gesture that had once read as courtesy and now felt weighted with implication. Each account was fragile, vulnerable to suggestion, to the erosion of time, and investigators treated them carefully, aware that memory can be reshaped by narrative. Still, when these fragments were laid side by side, they suggested a closeness that contradicted Weber's repeated insistence that he barely knew her. That contradiction became the axis around which the case turned, the question that drove interviews deeper, that sharpened the focus of every inquiry. If he had nothing to hide, why minimize what had clearly existed? Legal considerations began to dominate conversations behind closed doors. Prosecutors weighed the strength of circumstantial evidence against the risk of failure, knowing that an acquittal would not only end this case, but cement doubt forever. Defense teams prepared to argue contamination, coincidence, the unreliability of retrofitted technology applied to analog-era evidence. They spoke of reasonable doubt as if it were a shield, broad and impenetrable, and in many ways it was. The law demands certainty, not narrative satisfaction, and certainty remained just out of reach. As the case edged closer to formal charges, an unexpected complication emerged. A retired officer, one of the original investigators, came forward with concerns about early decisions made in 1992, decisions shaped by pressure, by limited resources, by assumptions that now seemed painfully narrow. He spoke of a lead that had been deprioritized, a potential suspect dismissed too quickly because he didn't fit the prevailing profile. His testimony didn't exonerate Weber, but it widened the frame again, reminding everyone that tunnel vision is the enemy of truth, no matter how compelling a story becomes. This revelation fractured public opinion. Some saw it as an attempt to dilute responsibility, others as evidence of institutional failure, and still others as proof that the case was too compromised to ever be resolved cleanly. Debates flared across media platforms, experts clashing over methodology, ethics, the meaning of justice delayed. In the noise, the core question risked being lost. What had actually happened to Anna Keller in those final, unrecorded moments, and who was with her when the city went quiet? Investigators responded by doubling down on what could still be verified. Digital reconstructions of movement patterns were refined, combining tram schedules, pedestrian flow data, and reconstructed lighting conditions to simulate the night of her disappearance. These models suggested a narrow window of opportunity, a path that intersected with Weber's known routines in a way that felt less coincidental with each iteration. Again, it wasn't definitive, but it tightened the margins, reduced the space in which alternative explanations could breathe. Then came another development, quieter but no less destabilizing. A woman living outside Berlin contacted authorities after seeing coverage of the case, claiming she had encountered Weber years earlier and that he had spoken, unprompted, about a woman who trusted him too easily. A remark she had dismissed at the time as awkward, but now couldn't forget. Her account was vague, secondhand, and legally precarious, but it added a psychological dimension that the case had lacked, a glimpse into a mindset that aligned uncomfortably with the emerging narrative. Weber's response to these escalating developments was measured but strained. His legal team limited his public exposure, statements growing shorter, more guarded. Friends noticed changes, increased isolation, a defensiveness that hadn't been there before. Yet even now, there was no confession, no dramatic collapse, no moment of undeniable clarity. The case advanced in increments, each one hard won, each one vulnerable to challenge. As prosecutors prepared to make a decision, the nation waited, caught between anticipation and anxiety. The phrase "cold case solved" appeared increasingly in headlines, sometimes with question marks, sometimes without, reflecting a collective impatience that reality refused to satisfy. Families of other victims watched closely, seeing in this case either hope or a cautionary tale, depending on how it ended. Behind the scenes, investigators grappled with their own doubts. They believed in the work, in the patterns they'd uncovered, but belief is not proof, and the weight of getting it wrong pressed heavily. A solved case brings closure, a flawed one creates a new wound. The distinction mattered, not just to careers, but to the integrity of a system already under scrutiny. As autumn settled over Berlin, mirroring the season in which Anna had arrived decades earlier, the city once again found itself suspended between past and present. The cold case hovered at the edge of resolution, illuminated by new evidence yet shadowed by old mistakes. Whatever decision came next would not simply answer a question, it would define how the nation understood justice in the long aftermath of silence and whether truth, once delayed, could still arrive intact. The decision came without ceremony, delivered in a room stripped of drama, where prosecutors spoke in careful language about thresholds and likelihoods, about evidence that pointed but did not yet lock into place. They would move forward, they said, but cautiously, building a case brick by brick rather than gambling everything on a single dramatic strike. It was not the declaration the public had imagined, no definitive claim of guilt, but it was enough to change everything. For Marcus Weber, life narrowed instantly, his name no longer just a line in an old file, but the center of a national fixation, his past scrutinized, his present constrained, his future suddenly uncertain. Search warrants followed, executed with a precision that contrasted sharply with the chaos of 1992. Apartments were cataloged down to the smallest object, storage units emptied, digital devices cloned and analyzed, even items that seemed absurdly mundane examined for trace evidence and hidden meaning. Investigators understood that after 30 years, the truth would not announce itself loudly, it would be embedded in habits, in patterns of keeping and discarding, in what someone chose to hold on to long after its practical value was gone. Every box opened carried the weight of expectation, and most yielded nothing but disappointment. Still, there were moments that unsettled even the most seasoned detectives. A jacket found at the back of a closet, its style dated, its fabric consistent with materials produced at the same facility as the fibers, though no definitive link could be made. A collection of tram tickets kept long past their usefulness, including several from the route Anna had taken. Each item was ambiguous, explainable, but together they formed a portrait of a man who remembered more than he claimed, who archived pieces of his life in ways that felt deliberate. The defense responded aggressively, framing the investigation as a retroactive construction, a story assembled from fragments that could mean anything when arranged with enough imagination. They emphasized the dangers of confirmation bias, the temptation to see patterns where none existed, especially in cases fueled by public pressure and the allure of closure. Experts were lined up to testify about the fallibility of memory, the evolution of forensic standards, the risk of mistaking technological sophistication for certainty. The message was clear. This was not a solved case. It was a narrative searching for an ending. As legal maneuvering intensified, another thread emerged, one that threatened to complicate everything. Records surfaced indicating that Weber had sought counseling in the mid-90s, sessions that coincided with anniversaries of Anna's death. The content of those sessions was protected, inaccessible, but their timing sparked speculation. Was this guilt surfacing, trauma unrelated, or coincidence elevated by context? The line between inference and intrusion grew thinner, and investigators had to decide how far they were willing to push without undermining the integrity of the case. The media seized on every development, often outpacing facts with speculation. Reconstructions aired nightly, actors retracing Anna's final steps, commentators debating motives as if they were obvious. In this environment, nuance struggled to survive. Weber was alternately portrayed as a monster hiding in plain sight or as a victim of institutional failure, his face dissected for signs of deceit, his silences interpreted as admissions. The case had become entertainment for some, a morality play projected onto a real human tragedy. Amid the noise, quieter voices persisted. A former neighbor of Anna's came forward, describing a conversation from weeks before her death, when Anna mentioned feeling watched near the tram stop, unsure whether it was paranoia or intuition. This account had never been shared with police, dismissed at the time as ordinary anxiety in a new city. Now, it added a layer of foreboding, suggesting that whatever happened did not erupt suddenly, but grew from a tension Anna herself may have sensed. Investigators revisited this possibility, re-examining her journals, her class notes, her correspondence for hints of unease. There were no explicit warnings, no names, but there was a subtle shift in tone, entries that spoke of fatigue, of wanting stability, of trusting people because the alternative felt exhausting. It painted a picture of vulnerability without melodrama, of a young woman navigating a city that demanded openness even as it punished it. As winter approached, the case reached another inflection point. Prosecutors announced that they would seek an indictment, a move that electrified the public and hardened divisions. Supporters hailed it as overdue accountability. Critics warned of a fragile case being pushed too far. For Anna's family, the announcement was both relief and terror, the promise of answers shadowed by the possibility of disappointment. They spoke again, briefly, asking for restraint, reminding everyone that justice is not a spectacle, even when it unfolds under bright lights. Behind closed doors, investigators prepared for the possibility that the case might not survive a trial intact. They reviewed every assumption, challenged each other's conclusions, brought in outside perspectives to stress test the narrative. This internal skepticism was not weakness, but necessity, a recognition that the cost of being wrong was measured not only in verdicts, but in trust. Berlin, watching all of this, felt the old unease return, the sense that beneath its polished surface lay unresolved histories that refused to stay buried. The 1992 cold case was no longer just about one night by the river. It had become a referendum on memory, on whether time clarifies or distorts, on how a society decides when enough is enough. And as the legal process crept forward, deliberate and unforgiving, one truth became unavoidable. Whatever the outcome, this case would not end cleanly. It would leave residue, questions unanswered, a reminder that even when evidence accumulates and narratives solidify, the past does not surrender easily, and some mysteries resist resolution even as the nation demands it. The indictment changed the temperature of the room, not just in court buildings, but in living rooms across the country, where people leaned closer to screens and argued in lowered voices, as if volume itself could tilt the scales. Dates were set, motions filed, timelines locked in, and with that, the investigation entered a phase where every word mattered more than ever before. What had once been fluid now hardened into positions, each side rehearsing its version of the past, each side aware that ambiguity, once an ally, had become a liability. Prosecutors refined their narrative with surgical care. They framed the case not as a single explosive act, but as a convergence, a slow narrowing of paths until only one remained plausible. They spoke of access, opportunity, proximity, and trust, weaving fibers, records, and witness recollections into a structure meant to withstand cross-examination. In this telling, Anna's final hours were not random but predictable, shaped by routines that someone else understood well enough to exploit. It was a story built on accumulation, on the idea that while any single detail could be explained away, the whole could not. The defense countered by dismantling that structure piece by piece, arguing that accumulation is not proof, that patterns can be imposed where none exist. They highlighted gaps in the timeline, uncertainties in the science, the absence of direct evidence linking Weber to the act itself. They reminded the court and the public that no one had seen him with Anna that night, that no confession had been made, that the case relied heavily on interpretation. Their strategy was clear: introduce doubt wherever certainty was claimed, widen the frame until the center could no longer hold. As pretrial hearings unfolded, new documents were entered into the record, some clarifying, others destabilizing. A logistics report from the textile facility suggested that materials from the batch linked to the fibers had been distributed more widely than initially believed, potentially undermining the narrow focus on Weber. Investigators responded by recalibrating their analysis, refining rather than retreating, but the defense seized the opening, presenting it as evidence of a case still in flux, still uncertain. Outside the courtroom, the human cost became harder to ignore. Anna's family attended selectively, their presence both dignified and devastating, a silent reminder that this was not an abstract debate, but the continuation of a loss that had never truly ended. Weber's family, less visible, faced their own isolation, their lives disrupted by association, their private griefs exposed to public judgment. In this collision of narratives, empathy was scarce and certainty was demanded by an audience conditioned to expect resolution. Then came a development that shifted the emotional landscape, if not the legal one. A former tram conductor, now elderly, requested to amend his original statement. He claimed that seeing reconstructions on television had jogged his memory, that he recalled Anna speaking to someone on the platform, a man who did not board the tram, a man he had assumed was waiting for someone else. His description was vague, cautious, and immediately contested by the defense as unreliable, shaped by suggestion and time. Yet the image lodged itself in the public mind, a shadowy figure at the edge of memory, neither confirmed nor dismissed. Investigators approached this carefully, aware of the dangers of retroactive testimony. They cross-referenced the conductor's recollection with weather reports, platform layouts, sightlines, anything that could anchor memory to fact. The effort yielded little that was concrete, but it reinforced the sense that Anna had not been alone in those final moments, that someone else's presence, whether Weber's or another's, had gone unaccounted for in the original investigation. As the trial date drew closer, expert witnesses were prepared, their credentials impeccable, their conclusions cautious. Forensic specialists emphasized probabilities rather than absolutes, a language ill-suited to headlines but essential in court. They spoke of fiber transfer, of environmental contamination, of the limits of certainty when evidence ages. Prosecutors leaned into this nuance, presenting it as honesty, while the defense portrayed it as weakness. The same words were used by both sides, framed differently, their meaning shifting with intent. Public discourse grew increasingly polarized. Some saw the case as a long overdue triumph of persistence and technology, proof that time could not protect the guilty. Others warned of a justice system bending under the weight of expectation, eager to close a chapter regardless of what the facts could truly support. The phrase "solved cold case" became a flashpoint, its use contested, its implications debated. Was a case solved when a suspect was named, or only when doubt had been extinguished? Behind the scenes, prosecutors faced a quieter crisis. A final review of the evidence raised questions about a procedural decision made early in the renewed investigation, a choice that, while legal, might be portrayed as overreach. They debated disclosure, strategy, risk, knowing that transparency could strengthen their credibility even as it complicated their case. These were the moments the public never saw, where justice is shaped not by drama but by restraint. As spring approached, Berlin seemed to absorb the tension, its streets alive, its history heavy. Memorials appeared briefly near the river, flowers placed and removed, gestures of remembrance that spoke to a collective need to mark the moment. Anna Keller's name was spoken again, not just as a case, but as a person, and in that recognition lay both comfort and sorrow. The night before the trial was set to begin, the city settled into an uneasy quiet. For some, it felt like anticipation, for others, dread. The past had been summoned, and now it stood at the threshold of judgment. Whether the evidence would hold, whether the story told in court would align with what truly happened in 1992, no one could say. But one thing was clear: the cold case had reached a point of no return. Whatever emerged from the proceedings would not restore what was lost, but it would define how loss is measured, how truth is pursued, and how a nation lives with the answers it finally dares to ask. The trial opened without spectacle, a deliberate contrast to the storm that had gathered outside, where cameras lined the steps and commentators rehearsed conclusions before a single witness was sworn. Inside, the air was dense with restraint, every movement measured, every word filtered through procedure. This was where the story would be stripped of tone and transformed into claims and counterclaims, where emotion would be tolerated only insofar as it could be translated into relevance. For those who had lived with the case for decades, the transition felt jarring, as if something fragile had been handed over to a machine designed to test its durability. Prosecutors began by situating the jury in Berlin as it was in 1992, a city in flux, its rhythms unstable, its sense of order provisional. They spoke of Anna Keller not as a symbol, but as a person embedded in that moment, her routines, her aspirations, the predictability that made her vulnerable. The narrative unfolded deliberately, introducing evidence as connective tissue rather than spectacle, asking the jury to follow the logic rather than be overwhelmed by it. The emphasis was subtle but clear. This was not about a single smoking gun, but about convergence, about the improbability of coincidence repeating itself so precisely. The defense responded by reframing that same convergence as construction, a story assembled after the fact, guided by the desire for resolution. They questioned the reliability of memory stretched across decades, the retroactive application of technology, the temptation to see intention in what might have been randomness. They warned against the seduction of narrative completeness, reminding the jury that the law does not reward compelling stories, only proof beyond reasonable doubt. The courtroom became a battleground not of facts alone, but of philosophies about truth itself. Witnesses followed, each carrying a fragment of the past into the present. Friends of Anna spoke quietly, their words restrained, describing habits and conversations that now felt heavy with implication. Former co-workers testified about routines at the textile facility, about Weber's role, about the ordinariness of days that later acquired significance. Experts explained fibers and transfer, soil composition and probability, their language careful, their conclusions bounded by caveats. Every testimony added texture, but also friction, as cross-examination exposed uncertainty, reminding everyone how fragile reconstruction can be. Weber himself sat motionless for most of it, his expression neutral, his presence a constant point of gravity. When he finally took the stand, the room seemed to contract. His answers were controlled, consistent with his earlier statements, his demeanor calm to the point of rigidity. He denied any involvement, denied any intimacy beyond professionalism, denied recognizing the significance others now assigned to mundane interactions. Under questioning, he acknowledged inconsistencies, but attributed them to time, to misunderstanding, to the erosion of detail that comes with age. It was a performance, some said later, others called it sincerity, and the difference between the two was impossible to quantify. Moments of tension emerged not from revelations, but from absence. The lack of eyewitnesses, the lack of direct forensic linkage, the lack of a confession hung over the proceedings like a low ceiling. Each side addressed these gaps differently, prosecutors arguing that such absences were expected in crimes that relied on trust and familiarity, the defense insisting they were fatal flaws. The jury listened, took notes, faces unreadable, tasked with navigating a terrain where certainty was promised, but never delivered. Outside, public opinion oscillated daily. Headlines shifted tone with each witness, social media amplified fragments out of context, and pundits declared momentum based on body language and speculation. For Anna's family, the trial was a relentless exposure, each detail another reminder of what had been taken and what might still be denied. For Weber's family, it was a slow unraveling, their lives reduced to footnotes in a story they could neither control nor escape. As the weeks passed, fatigue set in, both in the courtroom and beyond. The drama people expected gave way to repetition, to the grinding reality of legal process. Yet within that monotony, small moments resonated, a pause before an answer, a clarification that shifted emphasis, an expert conceding a limitation. These were the moments that mattered, the ones that would echo in deliberation rooms long after closing arguments were delivered. When the trial finally moved toward its conclusion, prosecutors returned to their central claim that while no single piece of evidence could stand alone, together they formed a picture too consistent to ignore. They asked the jury to consider probability, to weigh the accumulation of detail against the likelihood of coincidence. The defense closed by urging restraint, by reminding them that doubt is not a flaw in justice, but its foundation, that the cost of being wrong is borne not only by the accused, but by the integrity of the system itself. The jury retired to deliberate, and with that, control slipped from everyone else's hands. Days passed without word, the silence fueling speculation, each hour interpreted as signal. Berlin waited, its attention split between anticipation and unease, aware that whatever verdict emerged would be incomplete, that no decision could fully reconcile the past with the present. When the jury finally returned, the courtroom filled again, breath held collectively. The verdict, when it came, did not explode outward but settled heavily, its implications rippling slowly. Guilty on some counts, not guilty on others, a split that satisfied no one entirely. Weber was held responsible, but not absolutely. The case was labeled solved, but with asterisks that refused to be ignored. Applause was absent, relief muted, grief unresolved. In the aftermath, commentators rushed to interpret, to declare meaning, to assign finality where none truly existed. Officials spoke of closure, of justice served, even as appeals were filed and questions lingered. Anna Keller's name was spoken once more, attached now to a verdict that promised answers but delivered complexity instead. As the courtroom emptied and Berlin returned to its routines, the cold case entered a new phase, no longer dormant, no longer purely unsolved, but unsettled, its edges frayed by doubt. The past had been forced into the present, judged and labeled, yet it resisted containment. And in that resistance lay the enduring truth of the case, that some mysteries, even when brought to trial, never fully yield, leaving behind not certainty, but an echo that continues to haunt the city that first heard it ring in the early hours of a gray morning by the river. The verdict did not close the door, it merely changed the way it hung on its hinges. In the days that followed, Berlin tried to absorb what had happened, to translate legal language into something resembling meaning, but the translation failed more often than it succeeded. People spoke of justice as if it were a fixed point, yet no one could agree on where it now stood. Marcus Weber was no longer just a suspect, no longer fully innocent, not entirely condemned either, and that ambiguity settled over the city like a low, persistent fog. Appeals were filed almost immediately, their language precise, technical, stripped of emotion, challenging evidentiary interpretations, procedural choices, the weight assigned to inference. For the defense, the verdict was an opening rather than an ending, proof that doubt had survived despite the pressure to extinguish it. For prosecutors, it was validation tempered by caution, a reminder that partial accountability is still accountability, even if it fails to satisfy the hunger for certainty. The legal machinery moved forward again, slower now, more insular, as if aware that the public patience it had borrowed was nearly exhausted. Media coverage shifted tone. The urgency that had driven nightly reconstructions gave way to analysis, to retrospectives that asked not what happened, but how it had taken so long, and whether the outcome justified the years of effort. Some commentators argued that the case demonstrated the power of persistence and technology, that even decades later the past could be confronted. Others saw it as a warning, a case study in the dangers of retroactive justice, where the desire to resolve overwhelms the limitations of proof. The same facts were recycled, reframed, each telling reinforcing a different conclusion. Anna Keller's family retreated from view, issuing a brief statement that acknowledged the verdict without endorsing it fully. They spoke of mixed emotions, of gratitude for the renewed attention, of pain that no decision could erase. For them, the case had never been cold, it had simply been quiet, waiting for the world to care again. Now that the world had spoken, however imperfectly, they were left to navigate a new silence, one shaped not by neglect, but by unresolved answers. Weber, released pending appeal on certain conditions, became a figure of contention. Sightings were reported, some real, some imagined, each one sparking debate about what justice should look like in practice. Was restraint mercy or failure, caution or complicity? Neighbors avoided eye contact. Conversations stopped when he entered rooms, yet nothing overt occurred. No dramatic confrontations, just the slow erosion of normalcy. His life, like Anna's memory, had been permanently altered, tethered to a night that refused to remain in the past. Behind the scenes, independent reviews were launched, not just of this case, but of others like it, cold cases reopened and re-examined under similar initiatives. Investigators were asked to justify decisions, to document assumptions, to articulate why certain paths had been taken and others abandoned. The Berlin 1992 case became a reference point, cited in training sessions and policy discussions, its strengths and flaws dissected as lessons. In this way, it continued to exert influence, shaping futures even as its own conclusions remained contested. New information surfaced sporadically, never enough to upend the verdict, but enough to keep the conversation alive. A former acquaintance came forward with a recollection that didn't quite align with established timelines. An expert published a paper questioning aspects of the fiber analysis methodology. Each development reignited debate, each one seized upon by those who believed the case had been rushed, or by those who argued it had not gone far enough. The truth, elusive as ever, seemed to retreat with every attempt to pin it down. Public memory began to fracture. For some, the case was solved, the label sufficient, the discomfort something to be moved past. For others, it remained unresolved, a cautionary tale about the limits of certainty and the cost of forcing closure. The phrase Berlin 1992 cold case took on different meanings depending on who spoke it, shorthand for justice achieved or justice compromised. Language itself became contested terrain, reflecting deeper disagreements about how societies reckon with their past. The city itself bore subtle traces of the story. The riverbank where Anna was found became a quiet place of reflection, unmarked officially but remembered informally, a space where people paused without always knowing why. Berlin, accustomed to carrying layers of history, absorbed this one too, adding it to the sediment of unresolved narratives that define it as much as its monuments do. Life continued, as it always does, but with an undercurrent of awareness that some questions remain open no matter how many times they are asked. As the appeals process wound its way forward, years began to stretch again, the intensity fading, but never disappearing. The case settled into a new category, no longer cold, no longer active in the public sense, but suspended, its status conditional, its conclusions provisional. Legal scholars debated it, journalists revisited it on anniversaries, and Anna Keller's name resurfaced periodically, a reminder that time does not erase, it only rearranges. In private moments, investigators who had worked the case reflected on what it had demanded of them. Some felt pride, others doubt, most a complicated blend of both. They had chased the past into the present and forced it to speak, but what it had said was not a clear confession, only a series of echoes, each one shaped by who was listening. They understood now that solving a case does not always mean ending a story. Sometimes it means accepting that the ending will always be incomplete. And so the Berlin 1992 cold case lived on, not as a headline, not as a single verdict, but as an enduring question woven into the city's consciousness. It lingered in court records and academic debates, in family memories and public discourse, a reminder that the search for truth is rarely linear and never clean. Even when labeled solved, even when new evidence shocks a nation, the deeper mystery remains: how much certainty is enough, and what we do with the doubt that inevitably survives. Time did what it always does when attention drifts. It thinned the crowd but sharpened the questions. With the appeals inching forward through procedural corridors, the Berlin 1992 cold case slipped out of daily conversation and into a quieter, more dangerous space, where assumptions calcify and narratives harden without challenge. In that space, doubt did not fade. It reorganized itself, attaching to footnotes, to expert disagreements, to the places where the record felt least certain. The case no longer belonged to headlines. It belonged to specialists, to skeptics, to those who had something invested in proving that the past had been handled either bravely or badly. The appellate arguments were precise and unforgiving. Defense filings dissected the trial like a specimen, isolating moments where inference had been allowed to stand in for demonstration, where jurors might have been nudged by framing rather than fact. They questioned whether the sketchbook's provenance had been adequately established, whether the fiber analysis had crossed the line from probability into persuasion. Prosecutors responded with equal rigor, arguing that the totality of evidence had been fairly presented, that the jury's split verdict reflected discernment rather than confusion. The law's language was cool, distant from the human stakes, and yet every sentence carried the potential to reshape the outcome. While courts deliberated, parallel inquiries unfolded elsewhere. Independent journalists began retracing the original investigation, interviewing retired officers, revisiting archives that had been digitized but not fully explored. What emerged was not a smoking gun, but a pattern of institutional haste characteristic of the early 90s, a period when Berlin's police were overwhelmed by change and underprepared for complexity. Leads had been triaged aggressively, some abandoned not because they lacked merit, but because they lacked immediacy. This context did not absolve anyone, but it reframed responsibility, spreading it across systems rather than pinning it to a single decision. One revelation, in particular, unsettled the fragile consensus. An internal memo from 1992 surfaced, indicating that an anonymous tip had been logged and dismissed within hours, its content summarized too briefly to reconstruct fully. The caller had mentioned a disagreement near the river involving a woman and two men, a detail that did not align neatly with the later narrative focused on a single suspect. Attempts to trace the origin of the call failed. Records were incomplete, lines disconnected. Still, the memo's existence reopened an old wound, suggesting that the story might have been narrower than the truth from the very beginning. Public reaction was muted but intense, a low-level hum of unease rather than outrage. Those who had accepted the verdict as sufficient felt destabilized, while critics felt vindicated. The idea that the case might still contain undiscovered layers rekindled a sense of unfinished business. Commentators returned cautiously, framing discussions around process rather than blame, but the effect was the same. The past refused to stay settled. Anna Keller's story, once again, shifted shape. She was no longer just the victim of a crime or the center of a trial. She became a lens through which institutional memory was examined. Advocacy groups cited her case when arguing for reforms in cold case review protocols, emphasizing documentation, transparency, and the preservation of ambiguity where certainty could not be earned. In these discussions, her name functioned as both caution and catalyst, a reminder that justice pursued too narrowly can become justice deferred in another form. For Weber, the prolonged uncertainty was its own sentence. The appeals process suspended him in a state of conditional freedom, neither fully condemned nor exonerated, his identity permanently fused with a case that refused resolution. He rarely spoke publicly, and when he did, his words were clipped, defensive, stripped of rhetoric. Supporters framed him as evidence of a system overreaching, detractors as proof that accountability had stopped short. Between these poles, his actual culpability remained a matter of belief rather than fact, a reality that gnawed at the legitimacy of any conclusion. As months turned into years, the appellate court issued its decision, dense and carefully worded. Portions of the conviction were upheld, others sent back for reconsideration, not a reversal, not a confirmation, but a recalibration. The ruling acknowledged weaknesses without dismantling the case, reinforcing the sense that the truth lay somewhere between the stories told at trial. The legal outcome satisfied procedural standards, but it did little to quiet the deeper questions that had attached themselves to the case. Berlin responded with weary familiarity. This was a city accustomed to provisional endings, to histories that resist neat closure. The river flowed as it always had, indifferent to labels and verdicts, carrying reflections of a city that had learned to live with unresolved narratives. The place where Anna had been found remained unofficially marked, not by plaques or signage, but by memory, by the way people slowed there without quite knowing why. In academic circles, the case became a reference point in debates about cold case methodology, about the ethics of retroactive certainty. Papers were written, panels convened, arguments refined. Some praised the investigation's persistence, others warned against the seduction of technological hindsight. The same evidence was cited in opposing arguments, a testament to its ambiguity and to the impossibility of extracting a single, uncontested meaning from it. What lingered most stubbornly was not a fact but a feeling, the sense that something essential had slipped past at the moment it mattered most. Whether that something was a witness who stayed silent, a lead dismissed too quickly, or a misinterpretation that hardened into doctrine, no one could say with confidence. That uncertainty became the case's final inheritance, passed from investigators to courts, from courts to the public, from the public back into the city's collective memory. And so the Berlin 1992 cold case continued, altered but unresolved, its status perpetually in flux. It stood as proof that even when new evidence shocks a nation, even when a verdict is rendered and upheld in part, the deeper work of understanding remains unfinished. The past had been summoned, questioned, and judged, yet it answered only partially, leaving behind an echo that refused to fade, a reminder that some truths do not arrive as conclusions, but as burdens, carried forward by those who cannot quite put them down. The years that followed the appellate decision introduced a new, quieter kind of tension, one that didn't announce itself in headlines or courtrooms, but persisted in the edges of memory and conversation. Berlin moved forward, as cities do, but the case had embedded itself too deeply to be forgotten. Every anniversary of Anna Keller's disappearance brought renewed attention, not in sensational bursts, but in reflective examinations, articles revisiting evidence, podcasts dissecting timelines, historians placing her story alongside other unresolved moments in the city's past. The cold case had become both cautionary tale and study, a template for how unresolved crimes shape public consciousness over decades. Investigators who had worked the case long ago reflected on the choices they had made, some with pride, others with lingering doubt. Even decades later, they carried the weight of what they might have missed, of leads dismissed too quickly or avenues never explored. Memory, they realized, is a fragile ally in the pursuit of truth, and no amount of technology or methodical re-examination can fully compensate for what the passage of time erases. Their discussions in quiet rooms often circled back to the same question: could they have done more, and if so, would the outcome have been different? Meanwhile, Weber's life remained constrained by the shadow of the case. Though parts of his conviction had been upheld, others were reconsidered, leaving him in a legal and social limbo. He was no longer the private man he had once been, but neither was he fully public, fully condemned. Every interaction was scrutinized, every movement traced in the press, and rumors proliferated even as facts remained scarce. The city watched from a distance, aware that the man at the center of the story might never reveal the final truth, and that ambiguity itself had become part of the narrative. New leads appeared sporadically, often from unexpected sources. A researcher combing through city archives uncovered police reports that had been overlooked or misfiled, revealing minor inconsistencies in witness statements and timelines. A former neighbor recalled a fleeting interaction with Anna in the days before her disappearance, a detail so small it had been dismissed in the original investigation, yet now it suggested alternate paths her last movements could have taken. Each revelation was tantalizing, frustrating, and ultimately incomplete, reinforcing the sense that the case could never be fully contained. The media, too, evolved in its coverage. Rather than headline-grabbing, cold case, solved claims, reporting became investigative and retrospective. Documentaries traced the sequence of events, interviews focused on institutional failures, and online forums debated the significance of subtle details. Public fascination persisted, not as spectacle but as inquiry. Anna Keller's story, once frozen in a single dramatic night, had expanded into decades of consequence, shaping how Berlin thought about justice, memory, and accountability. Psychological analyses of Weber began to circulate as well, often speculative, often contested. Experts debated whether behavioral patterns observed decades earlier could shed light on his motives, whether consistent routines reflected opportunity or coincidence, whether silence over the years indicated strategy, fear, or something more inscrutable. These discussions added complexity, but no resolution, highlighting the chasm between understanding a person and proving a crime. The case also influenced legal procedures. Cold case protocols were revisited, policies adjusted for evidence preservation, witness follow-up, and archival documentation. Prosecutors used the Berlin 1992 investigation as an example of both diligence and caution, emphasizing the necessity of patience and rigor in a landscape where memories fade and evidence decays. Weber's trial, with its partial convictions and appeals, became a touchstone for evaluating how post-facto reconstructions are treated in courts, underscoring the delicate balance between advancing justice and respecting procedural fairness. Despite all this, the human toll remained evident. Anna Keller's family, though they had gained partial legal closure, still grappled with the absence of definitive answers. Grief had evolved but not ended, layered now with a sense of responsibility to keep her memory alive, to ensure her story informs future investigations, to bear witness to what had been lost. They moved forward, but the past remained present, a constant companion in ordinary moments. In the broader public consciousness, the Berlin 1992 cold case occupied a peculiar space. It was both solved and unresolved, a contradiction that fueled fascination and debate. Citizens recalled the initial shock, the decades-long silence, and the partial revelation, understanding that closure is rarely absolute. The phrase cold case itself came to embody this tension, something that is technically addressed, yet emotionally and morally unresolved. The city's landscape, too, bore witness. The river where Anna disappeared remained unmarked officially, but those who remembered walked its banks with a quiet reverence. Tram stops, buildings, streets, all retained echoes of her last known movements. Berlin itself became a living repository of memory, every layer of pavement and water reflecting the persistence of questions that time alone could not answer. And so, even as new technologies emerged, even as investigators refined methods and evidence was reinterpreted, the essential mystery endured. The Berlin 1992 cold case was no longer just an investigation. It was a chronicle of uncertainty, a testament to the limits of understanding, and a reminder that some truths, no matter how diligently pursued, resist being fully known. The city and its people carried the story forward, not as a conclusion, but as an enduring presence, a shadow over the landscape of history, a quiet insistence that the past is never truly silent. Years turned into decades, and the Berlin 1992 cold case persisted not as a headline, but as a presence, subtle and insistent, threading through lives, archives, and conversations. Legal proceedings slowed to a rhythm dictated by appeals and reviews, each document scrutinized, each argument meticulously parsed. Weber's partial conviction remained a point of contention, a reminder that certainty is often conditional, and that justice, when stretched across decades, can be both achieved and deferred simultaneously. For the public, the story no longer exploded into news cycles. It simmered, resurfacing in obituaries, anniversaries, documentaries, and retrospectives, each recurrence reframing what had been learned and what remained unknowable. Investigators, some retired, some still active, carried fragments of the case with them like talismans, reminders of persistence and frustration alike. They debated details in quiet offices, in seminars, in interviews, exploring procedural choices, evidence handling, and the complex psychology of revisiting trauma years later. Every decision made in the initial investigation and in the decades that followed was examined anew, with the advantage of hindsight and the curse of uncertainty. They knew, as all who work long-term cold cases know, that the passage of time is both ally and adversary. It allows perspective but erodes memory, preserves evidence in some ways, but leaves gaps in others. Occasionally, new tips arrived, an old photograph unearthed from a forgotten drawer, a diary entry from a neighbor, an anecdote from a tram conductor now elderly and frail. Each piece reignited interest briefly, but none fully resolved the lingering questions. Even modern forensic techniques, though powerful, could not untangle every thread of a story that began in 1992 with shadows, misdirection, and the impermanence of human recollection. The evidence had been preserved meticulously, but some aspects of truth, it seemed, could not be captured by fiber, DNA, or testimony alone. Anna Keller's memory, preserved by family and community, took on a new kind of weight. She became more than a victim. She became a symbol of unresolved justice, a figure invoked in discussions of policy, ethics, and the challenges of cold case investigations. Memorials were informal, small, sometimes only known to those who had loved her or who had followed the case closely. They were gestures of remembrance that acknowledged absence, the persistence of questions, and the human cost of crimes that remain only partially explained. The city itself seemed to remember. Berlin, layered with histories both celebrated and traumatic, carried the echoes of Anna's disappearance in its physical and cultural landscape. Streets, waterways, and transit routes traced her last known movements. Residents, consciously or unconsciously, absorbed the tension and ambiguity, their memories layering with those of investigators, journalists, and witnesses. The city's rhythm, in subtle ways, was shaped by a case that refused to be fully archived or neatly concluded. Meanwhile, discussions in academic and law enforcement circles emphasized the lessons of the case. Berlin 1992 became a reference in courses about criminal procedure, cold case methodology, and forensic evolution. It was cited as an example of both diligence and limitation, of how technology and persistence can illuminate old crimes, but cannot manufacture certainty where human memory and context remain incomplete. Analysts debated the role of inference, the weight of circumstantial evidence, and the ethical tension between seeking resolution and acknowledging the impossibility of full closure. Weber, increasingly isolated from public life, became a figure both notorious and enigmatic. He moved carefully, his social interactions monitored and scrutinized, his reputation permanently entangled with a single, dramatic event. Whether he was guilty in ways the law could not fully prove, or innocent of what the verdict implied, remained a matter of debate. His life became defined by a story larger than himself, a cautionary tale about how a single case can consume decades, shaping perception and memory simultaneously. Even as Berlin evolved new architecture, new policies, new generations, the shadow of 1992 lingered. Cold case units cited the investigation when structuring new procedures. Legal scholars referenced it in arguments about retrospective application of forensic science, and journalists revisited it to illustrate both the persistence of justice and the enduring limits of understanding. In this way, the past did not fade but became a tool for reflection, a reminder that history is alive, sometimes stubbornly so, and often incomplete. For Anna's family, grief remained complicated and persistent. Legal acknowledgement of partial accountability did not erase decades of absence or the lingering uncertainty about what truly happened. Their mourning adapted to a reality where answers existed but were incomplete, where resolution was conditional, and where closure was more a concept than a lived experience. They became guardians of memory, ensuring that Anna's name remained attached to both history and inquiry, to loss and to lessons learned. In the broader public imagination, the Berlin 1992 cold case evolved into a symbol of ambiguity. Solved and unsolved coexisted uneasily, reflecting both the limits of evidence and the persistence of doubt. It demonstrated how justice can be partially realized, how memory and technology interact over decades, and how a single unresolved crime can embed itself into a city's consciousness. Berlin carried the story forward, not as a closed chapter, but as an enduring presence, a reminder that some mysteries persist beyond verdicts, beyond appeals, beyond headlines, shaping the way a city and its people understand their past and confront the unresolved. And so the case, though decades old, remained alive in memory and debate, its contours shifting with each new interpretation, each revisit to archives, each reflection on what justice truly means. Berlin lived with it, researchers studied it, families remembered it, and the past, though partially illuminated, continued to resist complete capture, leaving behind an echo of uncertainty that refused to be silenced. Decades had passed, and yet the Berlin 1992 cold case still pulsed beneath the city's surface, a quiet but persistent presence. It no longer commanded front-page news or primetime broadcasts, but its influence lingered, shaping perceptions of justice, memory, and time. In the quiet corners of Berlin, tram stations, riverbanks, narrow alleys, shadows of that night in 1992 seemed to stretch longer, unseen but felt. Anna Keller's disappearance and the convoluted path of her investigation had become a lens through which both professionals and civilians measured the fragility of certainty. The case was studied, discussed, debated, and referenced, but never fully reconciled with the present. The appellate process had long ended, and Weber's partial conviction remained a source of contention. Legal scholars and journalists continued to dissect the decisions, arguing endlessly over probabilities, evidence interpretation, and procedural nuance. Some framed it as a triumph of persistence and forensic evolution, proof that time does not protect those who commit crimes. Others saw it as a cautionary tale of how retrospective justice can stretch the meaning of evidence, how decades can distort context, and how the pursuit of closure can sometimes create new ambiguities. Both interpretations coexisted, reflecting the case's inherent complexity and the city's divided memory of it. Weber lived largely in isolation, a man tethered to an event he could neither fully disprove nor entirely explain. His daily life was measured and constrained, interactions minimal, appearances rare, each step scrutinized by those who had followed the story for years. Whether viewed as a symbol of unresolved guilt or an individual ensnared by circumstance, he remained inseparable from the narrative of Anna Keller, a human embodiment of the uncertainty that had shadowed Berlin for decades. The city, in turn, absorbed his presence as a reminder that some pasts cannot be neatly closed. Meanwhile, Anna's memory persisted in quieter ways. Family members, friends, and advocates kept her story alive, ensuring that her life, not just her disappearance, was remembered. Informal memorials appeared along the river where she had vanished, flowers left, small tributes made. More than symbolic, they were insistences that the past mattered, that absence itself demanded recognition. Each commemoration was a subtle refusal to let history be sanitized, a claim that unresolved pain remains a valid part of the collective narrative. The case had also shaped investigative practice in Berlin and beyond. Cold case units adopted stricter protocols, emphasizing documentation, evidence preservation, and meticulous follow-ups. The Berlin 1992 investigation became a textbook example, referenced in seminars, training sessions, and academic studies. It demonstrated both the potential and limitations of forensic science, the fragility of human memory, and the moral weight of pursuing justice over decades. Future generations of investigators inherited not only its methods, but its unresolved questions, learning that closure is sometimes provisional and certainty often partial. Over the years, occasional new leads surfaced, an overlooked record, a faded photograph, a recollection from someone who had once been on the periphery, but none offered definitive answers. Each tidbit renewed curiosity and debate, highlighting the enduring gaps that time can create. The story, once immediate and shocking, had transformed into a layered narrative of partial truths, lost opportunities, and lingering doubt. It was a reminder that even with all the tools of modern investigation, some pasts resist complete reconstruction. Public memory of the case was equally complex. For some, it was solved, a partial verdict bringing limited justice. For others, it remained unresolved, a cautionary tale that illuminated the impossibility of knowing every detail, even when legal proceedings attempt to impose certainty. The phrase Berlin 1992 cold case became shorthand for ambiguity itself, a symbol that resonates differently depending on perspective, a case study in how unresolved crimes shape collective consciousness. Even as Berlin grew and changed, its architecture, population, and policies evolving, the cold case remained embedded in its identity. Streets, riverbanks, and transit routes carried traces of the past, subtle reminders of a night that would not be forgotten. Residents, whether consciously aware or not, absorbed the tension and ambiguity, their understanding of the city colored by a story that had stretched over decades, proving that the city itself can bear memory as much as its citizens do. For Anna's family, grief continued to coexist with a sense of duty, a commitment to preserving her memory and using her story to illuminate the challenges of justice delayed. They lived with uncertainty, knowing that answers existed only partially, and that the search for full clarity might never end. Their vigilance ensured that Anna remained more than a case number. She was a person whose life and absence shaped those left behind and informed the systems meant to prevent such tragedies. And so, the Berlin 1992 cold case endures, not as a resolved chapter, but as a living echo, a testament to the complexity of time, memory, and justice. It demonstrates that even when verdicts are rendered and evidence examined, some mysteries persist, shaping cities, communities, and individuals in ways that are neither neat nor final. Anna Keller's story continues to resonate, a reminder that the past is never fully silent, that uncertainty can endure, and that some truths, however carefully pursued, remain only partially known. Even decades later, the city carries the weight of what happened, its streets whispering fragments of a story that refuses to rest. Berlin moves forward, but the river remembers, its currents carrying echoes of a night that changed everything yet revealed so little. Shadows stretch longer along the banks where Anna Keller vanished, as if time itself pauses to honor absence. The case is no longer active, no longer in headlines, but it is alive in memory, in the quiet attention of those who still care, in the lingering questions that refuse closure. People pass by unaware, tram wheels click and hum along tracks, commuters glance at facades without seeing the invisible history layered into bricks and pavement. And yet, Those who remember know, the city itself has absorbed the tension, the ambiguity, the unanswered questions. Cold case files sit in archives, investigators have retired or passed, and Weber lives with the shadow of the past, tethered forever to a night that defined him in the public mind. Yet no matter how long he or the city endures, certainty remains elusive. Anna Keller's life and the void left by her disappearance has become a testament, a quiet insistence that the past is never fully gone. Every anniversary, every reflection, every examination of procedure and forensic technique is a reminder that some mysteries do not end neatly, that justice can be partial, and that memory, like water, flows around obstacles without ever fully revealing the bedrock beneath. The Berlin 1992 cold case has been solved in part, judged in part, but its true resonance persists in the spaces between facts, the spaces of doubt, of speculation, of human emotion that law and logic cannot contain. And so it lingers, a ghost not of horror, but of possibility. The city continues, life continues, but those who look closely, those who remember, hear it still, a name, a river, a vanished presence, and a question that refuses to be answered completely. Berlin keeps its secrets, the cold case endures, and the echo of 1992 remains alive, haunting not with violence, but with the persistent weight of what is unresolved, unclaimed, and unforgettable. Even now, long after trials, appeals, and